We're back with another episode of Boots, Balls and Bras powered by Pepsi Max. And we're building up to the UEFA Women's Champions League final. Barcelona versus Arsenal, 24th of May in Lisbon. And myself and Anita will both be there. Neat, before we talk about how big this game is for Arsenal, you were a part of the team in 2007 that actually won the UEFA Women's Cup, a two-legged fixture, because actually at the time, UEFA didn't feel that a Women's Cup final could get that many fans through the door. So they thought, actually, we'll have two home fixtures for each team and they can get their fans in that way. So, I mean, can you imagine, and like now having two fixtures home and away in a cup final? What was it like back then? Firstly, playing two fixtures and obviously the differences to what you see now in the women's game.
Yeah, I mean, back then, I think having the two fixtures, you felt like, of course, that's a difficult task. Obviously, we were playing a really good European side in Umeå, knowing we had to go away first and try and get a result there. In one sense, you could argue having the two fixtures gives you a chance, depending on how your result goes in the first leg. But of course, I think for us, it was a great opportunity to return at home to Meadow Park, try and fill out the stadium, get the atmosphere going. We knew it'd be tough. They had, world-class players, Hannah Ljungberg, for example. Ramona Backerman was a youngster, emerging talent coming through. So we had all these players we knew we had to stop. But it was an incredible experience, obviously, for us as a club. And that's the challenge. We weren't full-time professionals. We were playing a professional outfit. And I think that's what made it so special.
And you know what was special about your team? I remember, obviously when we played against that Arsenal team back then, and the reason why I'm going to compare the two is because you were so dominant in English football at the time. And the style of play, I mean, we talk about the beautiful game now. You lot played the beautiful game on some dodgy pitches, at times. But actually in that final, or the two-legged final that you had, you really had to adapt. You really had to swallow your egos a little bit and actually fight to get that 1-0 result over the two legs. Right. So what was it between the girls that you decided was an in-game decision? Was it a before game? What was it? Because I feel like going into this year's final, Arsenal might have to do something similar.
Yeah, I think for us, we knew that this team, Umeå, were probably better than us or overall. And they were going to have large spells where they would dominate the game and dominate the ball. And that we'd have to just really work hard and stick together and fight in those compete in those duels. And it wasn't a pretty game. None of the games I would say were pretty games. They were. They were pretty ugly games from my recollection. So I think I saw a recent clip from one of the home leg, our home leg. And I think there's one clip of me literally dragging back Hannah Ljungberg. And I think someone described it as old school defending, pulling out someone who's drunk on a night out out of a situation. And I just thought that was hysterical. But that's what it was. Literally, we scrapped for every inch of territory, every tackle, and some of it, we had a bit of luck as well. I mean, they had a shot, I think, that hit the post and then hit Emma Byrne and then went off, for a goal, a corner. But I think that's what it takes. Everyone digging in deep, even when you're suffering and even when it's hard work. Yeah. My task was to try and stop Marta, and I knew that. And I think maybe being a younger then as well as I was in that team, there's a bit of bravery and fearlessness I probably had to just go, sure. I want to challenge myself. And actually I wasn't too concerned about what I did on the ball as such. My main focus or my main priority was to defend. Yeah. And I think that's how I approached the game.
Yeah. And I mean, as I say, it was, for an outsider looking in, was so impressive the way that, as I said, you adapted, had to fight, made it really ugly, but got the result. And I feel like as we talk about tactics as we go through, I feel like it's something that at times I think Arsenal might have to do if they want to get this result against Barcelona. But let's talk a little bit about the form of teams coming into this game, because Barcelona's form coming into this final,
unreal.
I mean, the amount of goals that they score, I mean, we could talk about their front five, but then you look at their midfield and goals that come from there, assists that come from the midfield. They have bags of talent within their team. Arsenal also. And we know that in the WSL, Arsenal's home record, they've been scoring on average 4 goals a game. They're not at home. Barcelona have been doing this home and away, scoring goals. And Arsenal actually come into this having conceded, I think, nearly 14 goals in the last 3 games. So a lot of goals they've conceded, and Barcelona are scoring a lot. So if you look at that coming into it, does form matter when you go to a Champions League final?
I think it helps. I think when you have momentum on your side and players have confidence, I don't doubt that this Arsenal team can score goals. I think we've seen that in abundance. But I think the problem is, like you said, they've conceded a number of goals in the last 3 domestic league games. And that's 46% of their overall tally across the season in the last 3 games. That's not a good stat.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want going into a final where you have to be tip top in every aspect of the game. So that's something they're definitely going to have to sort of, is a bit of a watch out, I think, for them. But in terms of Barcelona, they have also not maybe, had a team that can go at them and all equally pose challenges and problems from an attacking point of view with the threat that Arsenal have.
Yeah.
So that might, would be interesting. That's why it's so interesting to see this matchup. But their front 5 or whoever it is, because they have so many rotations, is frightening. And you have to figure out how to stop that.
And we have to talk about that front 5 because Pino is actually the leading goal scorer in the Champions League. She's got 10 goals. Now, if you compare that to the amount of games she started in the Champions League, it's phenomenal that she's got that many goals. And most of them are from the bench. So you've got Pina, Pior, Pavaleo, if that's how you pronounce it properly. You've got Graham Hansen. I mean, they've got, Mateus, Bomati that get goals from midfield. When you look at that, what lineup do you think, or how do Arsenal deal with that? But 2, what lineup do you think they'll go with? What is their strongest front 4? 3, 4?
Oh, gosh. I mean, clearly, obviously, Pina's been a brilliant impact player. So, I think I can imagine them starting with a Paruello, for example, or Pio, which they've done in previous games, because I think they offer similar qualities. They stretch the back line. They like to exploit space and give opportunities as the game goes on, as it opens up to bring someone on like Pina. But I imagine Graham Hansen will be on the right. They'll have the normal midfield, Pateas, Bonmati, Gujaro, Broods at left back, as we've seen. I think it'll be a very similar lineup to what we saw in the semi-final. I think the challenge for Arsenal is you cannot make mistakes in your build-up play.
Yeah,
You've got to get that right. You've got to get the structure right and the quality right. Barca are very proactive in their high pressing structure and also in their counter pressing structure when, the opposition lose the ball. So you cannot allow them to get into that mode of where they just swarm you and stress you out and cause all sorts of problems. I think you've got to be able to recognise when they're playing their extremely high line and how you exploit that. And I think Arsenal have those players with the strengths to do that. If it's a Ford, if it's Chloe Kelly, Mead, obviously Russo, who can stretch back line but also connect underneath, then, it's about doing it effectively.
The only thing is, our question is, you've obviously mentioned that line there. Pina, top goal scorer. She actually started the second leg of the Chelsea game. They had a comfortable, I think a 4-1 lead, didn't they? She played off the left-hand side, but she's very different to Paruello when she plays. She's more somebody that wants to get beyond, whereas Pina likes to come inside in that little pocket and come in on her right foot. Do you think that because Arsenal do play a high line, they might go with Paruello? Because obviously if they play Pior, again, you think of the speed that they have then in attack. Do you think they'll go with that and use that speed that they have to try and get this Arsenal backline dropped off? Or do you think, Pina might be the one that gets in the pocket?
Yeah, I think they will opt for a Paruello or a Pile personally, because as you said, Arsenal do like to play a high line. Sometimes they like to build with a back 3 and push McCabe slightly higher. They'll see what Lyon did in terms of exploiting in transition moments and down between the centre-backs and the full-back areas. So those players are perfectly suited to exploit that. And with the speed, you've got to go, 1v1, can they exploit, say, Williamson or Catley potentially? I can imagine them doing that, because the risk you have for any team, same for Arsenal, if you start playing short game football all the time, it just becomes a bit predictable. You just got to make sure, I think, you have the right balance of players, one, connecting and stretching. So those rotations and movements are happening simultaneously to challenge those defenders in their decision making.
Yeah. So let's talk the systems then, because we know, predominantly throughout the whole competition and in the league, Barca play with a 4-3-3, and you kind of know the personnel that are going to play. They probably have their 11 pretty much set.
Yeah.
Arsenal, I would say, in recent games, certainly in the Champions League, they also have their 11. And they play a little bit imbalanced in terms of down that left-hand side. Obviously, Catley was a left-back and is now left-side centre-half. But obviously, Katie McCabe was a left-side midfielder. Now she's playing left-back. And obviously, you've got the work rate of Ford, Katie McCabe that likes to get high. Do you actually think that might be something that Arsenal, in terms of their build phase, might be considering, playing down that left-hand side, getting Katie McCabe a little bit higher, Caitlin Ford obviously inside or a little bit higher, and that way trying to force Graham Hansen a little bit deeper? Do you reckon that might be a little bit of cat and mouse that they potentially would try and exploit in this Barcelona game?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, Arsenal like to play down their wings in general, or find the switch of play to play out the other wing where there's, the opposition underload. So it makes sense to do that when you've got a player like Katie McCabe who has such strong attacking attributes and a threat in terms of her distribution to push her up. You've got the balance with Steph Catley. I always say it's such a weapon to have a left-footed left back as well, who's comfortable to not only step into the play and try and create those overloads in midfield areas, but to create the sort of overloads in the wing where you've got a forward who naturally likes to invert and come in and do those runs, blind runs in behind. It makes sense to do that because you've got to try everything. The point is, how do you challenge if it's Badje and you challenge Graham Hansen to defend? You got to challenge. You got to make them feel like they have to be pinned in and they have to do that job first and not cheat. Yeah, because I think Graham Hansen would rather cheat and stay higher, right, and not do that job. So that comes with bravery, though. Yeah. I think if Arsenal are brave and they go, we trust the quality of our possession to stay on the ball in the right moments, to release it in the right moments with that connection, then of course you can exploit it.
Yeah, it's important. I think that left-hand side will be important. I've noticed when I've watched Barcelona in the Champions League, actually their fullbacks don't tend to overlap their wide players. They give the wide players a space to go 1v1. So it would be interesting if you had Graham Hansen certainly on this side a little bit deeper when Arsenal are trying to play out. But on the other side, Emily Fox, she also likes to attack. But I would say, arguably, Caitlin Ford will do the up and down more so than the Chloe Kelly or the Beth Mead in terms of defensive. So do you think that they'll be prepared to do the both? If the ball's down the right-hand side, Kate McCabe will have to stay a little bit deeper and then allow Emily Fox to go higher? Or do you think they will try and play with that, keeping Emily Fox backs with Leah Williamson and Catley, for example, and use that left-hand side as a weakness that they might see within Barcelona?
Yeah, I think so, because if Esme Brutes plays and she's done exceptionally well in that left-back position, that's not a traditional role for her. Yeah. So she's also adapted and learning that role. Whereas you've got, say if it's Chloe Kelly or Beth Mead, for example, they're both players that like to go 1v1 against defenders. So you'd rather give them the room and not start bringing players into tight areas. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like that would probably work better for them. But again, I think that could be Arsenal's strategy. But if it doesn't work, they know they're capable, I think, of Emily Fox getting higher up the pitch and attacking. They can do it. Yeah. It's just getting the balance of it right and the understanding right. And Chloe Kelly also, whoever starts, recognising, all right, actually now we're adapting. Maybe I have to take a different position. I have to invert, create that space, or vice versa. Because we've seen Emily Fox also make those inverted runs, which are really clever and hard to defend. So I think it's just about assessing who they're up against and actually, are we the team that are getting joy in this moment and being relentless with that? Yeah,
the only thing I worry for in that is transitions and how good Barcelona are in those transitions. But I was thinking, you mentioned Brutes there, the left back. Obviously, we know her as a higher left midfielder, for example, or striker, as they say now. And I was wondering whether they'd play Rolfa, more experienced, again, was an attacking wide player, but, certainly in recent season has been really comfortable at playing from that left-back position. More for the experience, or do you think actually they're going to go, this is what we've been doing, it's a final, and we're going to continue with Brutes? Do you reckon they might be a little bit cagey with that position? Because that's the only position I'm half thinking they might, or they're still a little bit indecisive about.
It's tough to say, because up until this point, they've done exceptionally well with the team they've actually utilised, up until this point. So you think, well, the manager trusts the players to just execute the game plan. But of course, I think Rolfo offers a different depth, a different threat in terms of I think she has more physical presence as well. She can physically dominate. She has more experience, as you mentioned. So equally they could do that, but it's just a case of, will it be disruptive for them
I was
not?
just thinking more because as well, she's naturally left-footed. Whereas, Boots is right, and she likes to come in and then play, as opposed to, on the outside maybe, and finding those spaces behind Arsenal's back line. I think that's a real interesting one that maybe...
one to watch out for, isn't it?
100%. But we can't continue about this Arsenal without talking about Kim Little and how important she's been to the control in that midfield. I mean, we saw her away in Lyon and how she dominated that midfield area, both in and out of possession. I mean, she was first to second contacts in terms of that build. She knew when to slow it down, knew when to speed it up. She was phenomenal. How important is she in that Arsenal midfield going into this final up against arguably the best three midfielders in the competition?
She's massively important. I mean, that role requires so much game understanding and connections. And as we've seen, Kim Little has the experience. She has the technical ability. She's going to be pivotal in Arsenal's build-up phase, dropping in to support the back 3 or 4 in their build. But equally, I think what's so exceptional about what Kim does is her recognition of when to speed up play, when to slow it down, how to find the switches of play, and engaging with their own attacks. Because sometimes you watch midfielders or players who don't engage with their own team attacks, and the gaps get bigger. And then when you lose the ball, that's when the transition becomes, really important. So what she does well, and what she's going to have to execute in this game, is in those moments when Arsenal's flying forward with their numbers, is making sure that she's in and around them to win the second ball, the first ball, as well as be pivotal to the incisive attacking play that they have. And we've seen that, in the last few games. And obviously her getting her goal in the weekend as well, which was like, classic Kim Little.
No, we saw in the semi-final, we have to go back to that semi-final against Chelsea and how key the Barcelona midfield was. And we know that, equally Arsenal have a very good midfield. Certainly in terms of that control and technical balance that they have in there with Caldenti and Kim Little. We saw that against Lyon. But they stretched the Chelsea midfield. We know that Pateas and Bomati like to play quite high on the shoulders of midfielders and try and get that split between, say, the two deeper midfielders. Do you think Arsenal might change and have two deeper midfielders to combat that? We saw Chelsea try to go player for player in that second leg of the semi-final, and it just really didn't work. I mean, we saw the goal, the first goal they conceded. They thought Nuskin thought it was her player, but Matty just went running through and
do you think
completely changed.
Do you think saying in terms of personnel, or just
will Slagers decide to go? Are we gonna, because I would imagine that their strongest midfield at the minute for Arsenal is Kim Little, Caldenti, and Frida Marnham. So the three of them, we know between the three of them, they're all attack-minded midfielders. Kim Little has the more of the discipline and has been the deeper one and kind of playing from there. But you're coming up against the best midfielders, arguably, in my opinion, in Europe, right? So how do you combat that? Are we going to pull Caldenti back and take her game away from her? Are you going to bring Frida Marnham back alongside Kim in the build phase? Or because what I'm saying is that, which we're going to touch on Barcelona's attack and kind of their in and out of possession stuff, but the way they like to set traps, Barcelona, you can't leave Kim Little isolated in that midfield area in the build phase. And now we're talking build phase of Arsenal, and she's going to be key to that. But also Marnham and Caldenti are. But then, as I say, in that transition, they're going to be key.
Yeah, so I think in both aspects, so in possession, build, you can't just leave her as a single pivot every time. They got to find the moments, depending on how Barca structure their press, to play through her, probably play in to get out, for example, to face forward. But there'll be opportunities, I think, where you can drop into a double pivot. So more likely Caldenti than it would be Marnham. But in those instances, it's about, for me, not starting in those positions too early. So in the build, standing in those positions where they can just mark you. Right? It's arriving into space to then make those connections. And then equally, out of possession, I think the biggest thing in the system that they play, whether Arsenal play in that 4-2-3-1 or they play in that 4-3-3, is not collapsing into that midfield 3 where you get too flat, because then you just allow switches of play to happen. And we know how tiring that is if you don't get the traps right to then regain your shape and regain the press. So for me, it's about making sure they have that compact shape that nullifies those half spaces that Barcelona like to operate in, where they create those rotations. because they get those rotations, as you said, through Bonmati, Puteas, Hansen on one side, whoever plays up top, they'll just drop into that kind of like boxy shape and try and get in between midfielders. So they got to do two jobs. They got to be able to see the ball, get in the line of the pass and see who's dropping in behind them off their shoulder to try and nullify that. And the defenders, as in the back four, have to be brave with their line, but they've got to be brave in terms of stepping in with players, getting compact shape, forcing things wide where possible.
Yeah. No, there's lots to think about, because for me, to nullify the Barcelona press would be to miss lines. And rather than force and try and play through, which at times I feel like Arsenal create their own problems with that in terms of the quality. Is it a case of missing, because we're going to touch on Russo and how important she's been, and kind of missing that whole midfield and working off that? Because if you play with Kim as a pivot and then you've got the two, it might force Bonmati or Puteas to go further back, and then all of a sudden you could play out. And I think that's something that, I mean, hopefully they're looking at Arsenal, but I know that the physical presence of Russo is important for them, being able to hold up the ball, being able to bring players in from midfield. It might be a case of actually, rather than risking the ball into the Barcelona press, which is so good, they put you in that false sense of security where we think there's a pass in there, but actually they just swamp you. So I don't know whether it's a case of, as you mentioned, Caldenti, if she starts higher, maybe it's a case of, can you clip into that line first? Just to drop them off a little bit, just to drop Bonmati and Puteas off, or even more so, drop them all off and play into Russo. I think that's important, that when you talk about the final that you won, having to mix up your play with and without the ball, and maybe that more direct and obviously play territory football might be a better source for Arsenal.
And they've got the personnel to do that. I think if once they assess where they've actually got space and they can play, Russo is so good at hold up play and bringing others into play and hold, spinning off players to connect. So they can utilise that. I think even if you play into the forward line and you hit that top line, it's also about the movement of others, right? To start disrupting that defensive line and try and break their shape a bit and drag fullbacks into areas they don't want to go, as Brute, or Badge, for example, and the likes of Ford and, whoever it is, if it's Chloe or Mead, that they're making those darting runs across the line and in behind. Because you see Barca get exposed when they face more direct play.
I think that's important. I think in terms of that off-ball running is going to be so key for this Arsenal team in attack. Let's flip it, so them defensively and maybe Barcelona playing out. We know Barcelona like to play out. Now we also know that defensively Arsenal, I feel like they're at their best when they have a high press. I feel like they can sit off, but I feel like they're actually much better when they press higher up and stop teams from playing. Do you think that's a tactic or a style that they maybe need to adopt, maybe early on, and maybe do it in different moments within the game and manage those moments, but certainly start with that. Get in the faces of Barcelona, really disrupt them from the off, and maybe stop them playing out the way they want to.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think maybe because I'm a firm believer of, you can always drop into a mid-block shape if you need to, if you're not getting success and joy. But even the best players in the world can be stressed or made to feel stressed when you've got high pressure and someone running down your throat and forcing you to do the things that you don't want to necessarily do. And as you say, I think Arsenal have been the most effective when they have that coordinated press and it's aggressive and it's, everyone does it together. And it's about knowing how to manage the game.
Yeah.
I think every time Barca are building with their goalkeeper from a proper restart, why not high press? Why not structure to high press? I think in open play, they might have to assess moments where they're like, okay, we're not in a position to, because we just transitioned, we're recovering our shape, but you might suddenly drop into sort of like that mid-block shape or whatever. Yeah. But with the recognition of, if you can set your trap again, you go again to force them back and to get a high press on. But of course, it's about managing the game. I just think that Barcelona are too good technically, individually, across the park to allow them space and time.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that's when I look back to and I know it was really early on in the season, but if we go all the way back to the first group game, Manchester City at home to Barcelona, and they just got in their faces and equally could play. I feel like at times when Barcelona have come up against a team that want to get in their face and press, when the ball turns over, the team haven't been good enough to keep the ball. Whereas Man City could do that. We know that Man City with the ball are very, very good, very dominant as well. We also know Arsenal are very good with the ball, and that's the style they like. So actually having that high press and trying to win it higher up surely will be more effective for them than to give them too much of spec and drop into that, mid or low block.
No, definitely. I think, like as you said, why did Man City get success? Because every single player on the pitch was really brave. They were brave first and foremost. They trusted their game plan and they did it to a T. They didn't give any feeling of like insecurity. And I think when you start playing with that little bit of insecurity and 50-50-ness, that's when you give really good players the opportunity to expose you. But Barca, they're a brilliant team, but they're a team that you have to make the best players in the world feel that they're suffocating and uncomfortable. Like, you have to do that. You can't give them, the opportunity to just go, all right, now we're dictating the play.
Yeah.
You've got to try and take some of that control away, I think.
Absolutely. I feel it's something that Arsenal have to do from the off, is get them out of their rhythm. Because once they get into that rhythm and they settle, you're in trouble. But equally, once Arsenal are in their rhythm, they settle also. So I think this game, there's so many key areas that we could talk about. So let's talk about some key matchups then. And look, the first one I'm going to ask you about is Katie McCabe and Graham Hansen. As you said, we just spoke a little bit about it. Katie McCabe is very front-footed, very aggressive, somebody that don't mind to leave one in on you. And then you've got Graham Hansen, who likes that 1v1 battle, will be allowed to do that. Badgie will just give her the space to be able to do that, so won't take her space up. How do you see that one? Is it cat and mouse? Is Katie got to play the game? Katie McCabe got to play the game a little bit and try and do more attacking and get Hansen to defend a little bit? Or do you think that Graham Hansen's that good that the reason why fullbacks don't do it is because she don't care? She will cheat and stay in her kind of half positions and not, even if Katie goes high, she might cheat on the opposite side.
Yeah, I think it will be a bit of cat and mouse, to be honest, and a bit of kidology, like, that psychology part of the game, because I don't think Katie McCabe should stray so far away from her own game. I think there'll definitely be some shithousery. She'll definitely be aggressive defensively, and I think she has to be. But obviously in the right areas of the pitch. She's got to, when Arsenal are in possession, of course, get higher up the pitch, create the overloads. You're creating problems for them to solve, and you're taking a player like Hansen, who doesn't want to defend really, into situations where she's going to have to defend and, force mistakes. I think the other thing is, as we saw against Lyon, one of the challenges for Katie was just recognising when to be really tight, when to drop off, when to arrive into pressure, because that's where she could get caught out at times, not all the time, but at times. And against someone like Graham Hansen, who's very creative, very innovative on the ball, does clever things that you won't even see, before it happens. You can't really afford to give her those moments, you want to get into pressure when she's deeper in her half. Absolutely. Because she's less of a threat in her half or on the halfway line than she is in their own half. So that's the only risk. I wouldn't want her to sit so deep and drop off so far that she'll have the room to sort of say, I'm going to stay higher up the pitch on you, just wait for the ball and then start doing her magic 1v1. Force her into areas where she's deeper.
I was going to say that because I felt like in the first leg for Katie against Diani, so for Lyon, I actually felt like she was a bit too eager to get there. A little bit, wanted to win everything, wanted to be front-footed and left a lot of spaces behind. And obviously we know the first goal at the Emirates came from that. Her distances weren't quite right. She's gone in to try and make a challenge. Diani's got beyond her, and the recovery, is difficult. We know similarly that Graham Hansen has that skill and ability to get beyond. But I actually felt in the second leg, out in Lyon, Katie McCabe's discipline and distances were a lot better. And I feel like if she can mirror what she did in that second leg, I feel like Graham Hansen will be facing her own goal more than she will the Arsenal goal.
And that comes with experience and exposure, which is a great thing, because you're talking about the progression as well from Katie, is that she learned something from that game and she adapted and it improved.
And I feel like that's something Katie does.
Yeah.
She doesn't like to be, she's Irish. We know that. They're very proud people. So, she'll certainly want to be put on over on Graham Hansen. But, if you are watching the game, that's certainly a matchup that I would say would be key in the game. There's another area, and there's so many midfielders that we could talk about. But the two I've picked is Caldenti, because we know her importance at Arsenal this year. She also moved to Arsenal from Barcelona, so in terms of those insights. And then Patry. We always talk about Pateas and we always talk about Bonmati, but actually her role and how key it is, because she also kept Kira Walsh out of that Barcelona team. And so how important is that matchup and how exciting is it? Because these players would know each other. They would have trained with each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting matchup because I think Guijarro goes kind of under the radar a little bit. And that's because, of course, she's with, other superstars in Putellas and Bonmati that she kind of gets lost. But she's a bit of an unsung hero in that midfield because she does all that gritty work as well as she's got the technical ability to play forward. But she will equally try and affect opposition build-up play, stop, high pressing. She's aggressive and proactive in their counter pressing game. It's going to be a fascinating matchup with Caldente, who is also adapted to playing a slightly deeper role, but can drift. Caldente can drift left, she can drift right, she can come centrally. So how they manage her movement as well, I think is going to be fascinating. But this is the midfield matchup of dreams, I think.
Yeah, and as well because Caldente naturally throughout her career has played off that left-hand side of a front three.
Yeah.
And it's been really comfortable out there and had most success. But I actually feel since Renee Salega's brought her more centrally, she's had more success in terms of goals and assists. So statistically, on paper, she's had a better season more centrally than she did out in the wide areas. But she obviously felt a lot more comfortable out on that left-hand side. But as you mentioned, she likes to drift. So in terms of Guijarro, in terms of her marking her, is that something that Caldente might be aware of? Where can I take her? What areas of the pitch can I get her in, which might then free the Marnham or balls into Russo's feet? Do you reckon that's something that she might think, having they know each other from training with each other at Barca, that she might try and do within game? Because she's an intelligent player.
Oh, she's a super smart player, and I think she, more than anyone, knows Barca style. Yeah. She'll know them tactically. She'll understand their triggers for their movements and their rotations. So if anyone is best placed to try and exploit that, it'd be her. And obviously she will be sharing that information, I'm sure, with the dressing room and the rest of her teammates. But yeah, for her, it's got to be about, for any player, it's about how are you challenging the decision-making of those players in opposite numbers to you. Same for Guijarro. She's going to have to try and find space where she doesn't want to go, and affect it and be brave sometimes to stay away from the game, because sometimes as a midfielder as well, you're eager to get involved, you're eager to get on the ball, but it's trusting your teammates will find you. Yeah. And, she's so clever, I think, at finding opportunities to get off the back shoulder of players to then take a touch forward and then start playing and trigger that attack. So if she can get more moments like that, then she'll get success, I think. But again, it's all about disrupting clever players like Guijarro and their whole midfield unit, disrupting it because they want to be more on the ball. All of them, I think, than defending.
Yeah, no, I was going to say Guijarro because she does like to work the opposite side of, say, the centre half and obviously the midfielder that then marks her, which then opens up all the space to then be able to move forward with the ball. It's that kidology, isn't it? In and out of play. How Caldente, where she takes her into areas, because you might take her into an area which you think is, for you, very good. But if that ball transitions and her working the back shoulder, which she's very good at, and receiving and getting her team on the front foot, is something that Caldente will have to be aware of. So again, an absolutely fascinating matchup that,
for sure.
Again, I'm sure like we're midfielders, stroke defenders, that we get excited about. But let's talk defenders, Anita, because Russo's coming into the game in great form in terms of goals. She's up against Leon and Paredes. They haven't really been challenged this year as a centre-half pairing. Now, we know if Russo can put herself about, will run for 90-plus minutes, can be physical, doesn't mind dropping in if needed, will get beyond, will drift into areas. How do they deal with her?
I think how they're going to attempt to deal with her is to be really aggressive. I think they're going to try and put, sort of get a body on her and stay tight to her and just be aware of where she is, which I think is going to be challenging for them in a different respect. But the main thing is that they love to squeeze space. They like to get a high line. So they're going to probably try to reduce space for her to get in beyond and affect their line. But I think for Russo, on the flip side, if Arsenal can get into these wide crossing areas, which they love to do, she'll be a threat and a problem in the box.
Massive.
And I think they probably, compared to, you could say, Lyon or some other teams, probably struggle a bit more with that kind of aerial threat and physical presence in and around the box. their players in particular, I think both of them, but I've noticed Mappy Leon in particular, that get frustrated when decisions don't go their way.
Yeah.
And when they're trying to, they're getting high pressed and they're forced into areas where they're forced into making mistakes. And obviously she's coming back as well, into playing more consistently. So I don't think she's fully at her best yet.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a bit of, I think, forcing a bit of insecurity in her build-up play.
Yeah.
But out of possession play, I think Russo just needs to stick to how she's been playing, which is using her physical presence, being bold and brave to hold off the defenders.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mentioned, I spoke to Kelly Smith actually before their recent game against United, and I was just talking about some of the work that she's been doing with Russo. And I feel like the reason why Russo scored as many goals as she has, because she's been a lot smarter in her play, playing more centrally, not wasting energy out in channels and, dropping really deep where then she can't affect the box in, those moments when the ball gets into wide areas. But I think it is important when the ball is in those wide areas, she is working those centre halves, try not be marked, getting in between them, because they haven't been used to players that, are as physical as Russo, and that will be on them for 90 minutes. So again, that's somewhat another matchup within the game that I'm really looking forward to. I think that she could cause this centre half pairing real problems. If she can find that little bit of form, I know she didn't score in the last game, but if she can find that little bit of form again, I think she could be a real handful. But before we move on, Nate, is there any other kind of standout individuals that, we know the Bomatis and the Pateases that we, really can affect the game. But outside of the names that we've said, one player that, I really like and probably don't get spoken about is Caitlin Ford.
Yeah.
I think the work she does without the ball really helps Arsenal's play. She certainly sets those, those presses in the higher areas. I think she could be a little bit better in the final third in terms of the quality. But she's somebody that is relentless. And goes a little bit under the radar, very selfless in her style. Do you reckon she could be key to, if Arsenal are to have success?
Yeah, I think she's been key all season for Arsenal. She's been one of the consistent high performers for the team. And she's a player that's difficult to play against because you keep width, but she equally can invert and stay in those inverted positions. And she likes to commit 1v1 against defenders. And what I really enjoy about Caitlin Ford when I watch her play is just that kind of belief that she's going to make something happen.
Yeah.
She's always driving into the box at speed and spinning players and trying to connect. And I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
The biggest quote I always remember from when we were international players is, if you're anywhere in around the box, get yourself in the ball in the box, right? And I think that's what she does so well. So it's just that final bit of, quality and clinicalness that she can obviously keep dialing up and elevating. But I think she is key for that reason, because no defender, especially in the modern game, wants to have to start running backwards and trying to stop players chopping them inside 100%. Where they've got the whole frame of the goal to aim at. So if she can get those players into more of those scenarios where they're lunging and trying to do last ditch, blocking, then they'll get some joy, I think, from that.
Yeah. So I do, as I said, Caitlin Ford amongst all the rest of the superstars that will be on the pitch. Before we move on, Neats, it's just come to mind is that we spoke about the goals Arsenal conceded. They've had an injury to their goalkeeper, or their number one goalkeeper, Domsela, has been out injured in those last 3 games. Their second choice goalkeeper, Zinsberg, has come in. How important is it to get Domsela fit for this final?
Massively important. I'm sorry, it's massively important. It is. I think she's been the number one keeper for the majority of the season, bar this injury. Having an intact back five that have that relationship and dominance, we've seen across the league the benefits of that.
Yeah.
When we talked about teams like Man United, their defensive records, Chelsea the same. I think for that relationship and understanding, it's vitally important. I think when you look at some of the goals that have been conceded over the last 3 or 4 matches, it's just not good enough as well for some of the goals they've conceded. One was from build-up play, one's from, flapping or whatever. I just think you need someone who's going to be in there in those massive moments, critical moments, and pull off big saves because they're playing a top European side, arguably the best European side in the women's game right now, and they're going to cause problems. They're going to get shots off on goal. And those are the moments you're going to need a big keeper with a big ego, with the quality to match to come up with big saves.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, look, I think in terms of settling your backline, you've played in backline needs where, you know, a goalkeeper that makes you feel confident and secure makes such a difference, you know, just mentally. Take out, you know, the ball, just mentally going into a game, knowing that you have that security, as you mentioned, that the presence, the ego, whatever it is that goalkeepers have that make them the best. When you haven't got a goalkeeper that has that, or doesn't seem to have it, or have lost it a little bit, because maybe Sinsberger, I feel when I'm watching her, has lost that little bit that she used to have. I mean, she was number one for a couple of seasons at Arsenal, but she seems to have lost that presence she maybe had when she first come. And
a bit of
you know, it's
confidence
really unsettling for a back line when, you know, the goalkeeper probably ain't sharing that same presence and confidence as a back line.
Yeah, massively so. I think it's obviously a bit of trust and a bit of bravery. And I think when you start conceding goals in the fashion that they have in the last few games, then that's when those insecurities start to creep in. And then you don't start executing everything that you plan to do as well as you would like. So you'll build up play, suddenly you don't want to play out. You know, suddenly you're not making the right decisions whether to get the team in and play longer because everyone's a bit just uncertain or unsure. So like you said, I think having a keeper that can just steady the ship and everyone feels assured in at this current time is vitally important.
So let's see what happens in 2 weeks' time. But Neat, we're finished tactically. We spoke about the players, we spoke about individuals, we spoke about the history of the club, and back in 2007 was the last time they won it. One thing we haven't spoke about is the fan base of both of these women's teams. I mean, they are widely followed. I mean, I think back to the final Barca was in, 2 years ago against Wolfsburg in Eindhoven. I went into the town centre for a coffee in the morning, and the town centre was absolutely filled with Barcelona fans making the most noise really early, even before the shops had even opened, and they were making the most noise. But we also know here, Arsenal fans, I mean, they sell out the Emirates. They've been getting 60,000 or 45 plus thousand followers, to every home game. Unbelievable fan bases, both teams. That excites me. A sunny day in Lisbon with two sets of unbelievable fans. How important are these fans going to be, and how exciting is it going to be, walking through that town centre as a fan on the day, and even, the players, because what happened when I was in Eindhoven is the fans found out the hotel that the women were staying in, and they were outside, the hotel, and it's a brilliant picture. They were outside the hotel, and the Barcelona players were there were glass windows.
I know, right?
And, Lucy Bonds and everybody, and they're like having a little bit of fun with each other. And then obviously when they come out of the hotel on the way to the game, the fans are there making noise. And how important is that for the players to feel it, and then for the fans to make that noise and, really give them that 12th player that they might need?
I mean, this game is nothing without fans, right? And the atmosphere they bring, and they go on a journey with their teams and their players. And this is their moment as well to celebrate and be part of. I think it's hugely important. I think the fact that it's in Lisbon in Portugal probably favours travel-wise for the Spanish fans, just crossing the border really. But listen, all the fans have got to get out there. They're going to be out there. They're going to make sure they pack their sunglasses, bring the party vibes, atmosphere, cheer on their teams. And I'm sure it's going to be absolutely packed. Those players are not going to be able to hear themselves or communicate. And that's what you want. Yeah. The players thrive in these moments where they feel valued, they feel seen, they feel supported. It's going to be outstanding because these are the two probably best supported clubs in women's football. So the turnout, I imagine, is going to be immense. And just have that feeling where you're in and amongst the fans and they're chanting and singing and all of that parading.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Absolutely. That's what you play.
It excites me just thinking about it. The thought of it, as I said, I was at that final 2 years ago, and just the thought of that. And as I said, I was at the Emirates at the weekend. I think 45,000. Knowing that these fans are going to travel and make the most noise for these players, I mean, I'm excited. It's going to feel like a proper Champions League final, in my opinion. Before we go on to some predictions, how big is it for Arsenal as a club if they are to win this Champions League?
Well, it's massive. I mean, how big is I can't even describe how big it is. It's monumental. I think for the position that Arsenal is in now as a club in terms of the commercial side, the marketing, the attendances, they're doing all of this stuff phenomenally well. They're leading the way for that in our domestic game. And the next big thing now is about winning, having that piece of, silverware to match every other aspect that they're doing so well. it's vitally important. We need to have an English club back there with a major trophy in the cabinet. And, this is no better time than now to do it, right? This is now or never. Absolutely. It feels a bit like we don't want to wait another 18 years to be in this position again. So, I think it's massive. I think it's massive for them as well from a in terms of everything they do, recruitment for next season, that knowing that players go, if they manage to do it for the next season, that the next ambition is, can we do it domestically and get ourselves back in there again? All of that is massively important.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing to elaborate on that. I think you said absolutely everything there. We're going to go with some score predictions. I've been toying, I've been going this way, that way, and da-da-da-da-da. You want me to throw mine out first? Or do you want to go
go on, you throw yours out.
And this has just come to me as we've been doing this pod and as we've been going and talking through the players. Before I was thinking, early on I thought Barca were too dominant. Then I saw Arsenal in the semi-final. I thought, one-off games, Barcelona can lose them, it'll be Arsenal. And then just listening to these matchups and areas that both teams can win, I'm going to go 2-2 and Arsenal win on penalties.
Woo! Wow.
Yeah. That's my prediction.
Okay, I like that. I like that. I was actually going to say, I think it'll be hopefully a free scoring game.
I think there'll be goals for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, but I would go 2-2 an extra time winner. I hope it's Arsenal. I hope it's Arsenal, but yeah. I don't know.
Is that copying me or?
No. I think I really feel like it's now or never. And actually, I feel very. I don't know. I just have a feeling that they could do it.
I have a real good feeling for Arsenal. As I say, one-off game, and if Arsenal turn up like they did against Lyon away, which completely wrote off, and even the return fixture against Real Madrid, they was probably wrote off. This is their year. When you come back and kind of have that, you feel like something's with you. If that is to happen, who would you say is going to be player of the match?
Ooh, player of the match.
I'm going to go Kim Little. I think if they are, I think we saw what she did in that semi-final and the control. I think, you need somebody that kind of has that steady head, is willing to do the ugly, but as well as control the game, both in and out of possession. And I feel like if they are to go and do, what they haven't done in 18 years, I think Kim Little is key to that for Arsenal.
Okay, I'm going to say Caldente.
Okay.
Just because she's got to be the Pied Piper of this team. And just, she knows Barca. She's got to be the one to unlock it.
That would be nice, right?
Yeah. It'd be a great story for her
great
as well.
story. Returning to your team, winning and getting player of the match. Needs, it's been an unbelievable episode, trying to pick positives and negatives from both teams and areas where both teams can win the game. And as I said, as the episode was going on, I swayed between one team and the other, and I've ended up with a draw. So there we have it. But guys, that's it for our UEFA Women's Champions League final preview show powered by Pepsi Max. So thank you for listening to Boots, Balls and Bras. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and never forget, follow us on our socials and get involved with all the conversations.